Yeah.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the DML Commons Professional Pathways Unit 4 somewhat late kickoff webinar. My name is Rafi Santo. I'm from Indiana University and part of Hive Research Lab, and I'm here with my two co-unit organizers, Adam York from CU Boulder and Dixie Ching from New York University, and also my partner at Hive Research Lab. And we deeply, deeply apologize for the lateness of the start here. We had a number of technical difficulties that took a while to get through. So we're really sorry about that, but we're going to figure out today how to condense some of our conversation down and still get to the incredible insights and stories from the great panel that we have lined up here, who will have a chance to introduce themselves shortly and share from their kind of professional pathway experience. A couple of logistics. If you're watching from the DML Commons site, underneath you'll find a link to the Etherpad. If you're listening, you can also just go to etherpad.mozilla.org/DML Commons Unit 4. That's capital DMLC and capital U. I believe the capitals make a difference. You can also hang out with us on the DML Commons hashtag over on Twitter and ask questions. And we'll be, people have already been engaging in this opening activity that we've started around just sharing 2 lines about yourself and who you are and what you focus on, which is a big part of the kinds of things that we're talking about today in terms of professional identity and how you situate yourself. And over the course of this webinar, we are going to have our awesome guests share a couple of anecdotes from their experience around developing a professional identity, and we're going to be taking lots of questions from the audience. So if you are in the Etherpad, go down to the bottom, and you can upvote questions, add questions, etc., and we'll make sure that they are addressed by our fantastic panel. I'm going to pass it over to Adam and Dixie now to get into the meat of things.
So we were going to take some time to do opening activity there where you write 1 to 2 sentence description. We will go ahead and not take a bunch of time with that, but still ask people to write in a short description of your work. And also please read through other people's and make comments if you see something that you like or if you have a question. But we will just let that be active while we jump into the conversation. So I'll turn it over to Dixie.
Okay, great. Thanks, Adam. Hey, everyone. So we thought that a good way to start the conversation is by going to each of our guests and asking them to provide a short sort of anecdote or perspective or a bit of advice around authoring a professional identity, including, sort of how it could be sort of like how they did it, what sort of advice they thought was helpful, what sort of challenges they had to they kind of encountered and how they worked through it. So I thought we would just go down the list here, and in the interest of time, sorry you guys, if you don't mind, if you could keep it to like 1 to 2 minutes, that would allow us to have enough time to do some a little bit of Q&A afterwards. So Dylan, why don't you start us off?
Hi everybody, I'm Dylan. My professional identity has morphed a bit over the years. When I first came into graduate school, I had a strong belief that I was going to focus on game-based learning. I was going to design games that help kids learn things. And then I kind of fell in love with statistics, which was a weird thing. Then I tried to tell people, well, I'm also doing assessment stuff. And then they were like, so are you a games person or are you an assessment person? And I didn't really have a good answer for that. Jim gave me a good answer. Jim G was like, games are assessment. So you are a games person and an assessment person. But the real shift in my professional identity came when I left academia and co-founded a startup, because I was surprised. I was surprised to learn that people outside of academia, they think if you're an expert on something related to learning, then you're an expert on learning, like all learning. So I was put into the role of owning the early learning space, the sort of developmental psychological aspects of our startup. And all the investors and all the people we'd meet, they'd say, well, you got a PhD in learning. You know all about this stuff, you know? And instead of trying to sort of split hairs with them and say, actually, no, my specialty is this. You know, what you're talking about is actually this, and it's a little bit different, so we probably want to have someone who's an expert in just this. I had to just swallow it. I had to say, yes, I am. I'm an expert in learning. And then I'd go, and I had to go and read a bunch of stuff and basically get up to speed very quickly on early learning. And now I feel very comfortable speaking with authority on topics in early learning. So of course the startup that I work with has now just moved into English language learning for kids who are 8 to 11 years old. And because I'm the guy who knows learning, I clearly know about second language acquisition too. So the next step in my development of my personal professional identity is going to be to become an expert on second language acquisition.
That's really nice in that, in a way, interacting with your environment kind of helps shape sort of your identity as well. And
I very much like the opportunity to remain a lifelong learner.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, so it serves us well to adopt that orientation. Great. Cool. How about, okay, so next we have Yujin.
Hi, my name is Yujin. Similar to Dylan, I've been kind of struggling with my identity as am I an assessment person or a learning person as well. But as he said, yes, assessment, especially in this technology-rich environments, you can really separate assessment from learning. So before I joined WPI as a postdoc, I was working with Valshut at Florida State doing a lot of game stuff. So for the past 6 years, I've been spending time how we actually design assessment around game environments. And now I am working with Science Inquiry Group where we use a lot of simulations. So I'm kind of experiencing two different, very different environments where I have to again kind of shift my identity from game-based assessment designer to more curriculum development, assessment development person. So I think we are pretty much like lifelong learner where we have to kind of think about what our core identity, which says for me it has been assessment, and maybe it can be different environments and different domain. It can be second language acquisition, it can be math, it can be science. But I think we really need to think about like what is the core thing that I want to do for a while, and that's what I've been doing.
Oh, sorry. That's great, and I'm sensing a theme in terms of being a lifelong learner is kind of the name of the game here. Thank you. So next, Cassidy.
I think you have to unmute myself. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Cassidy Puckett. I am a sociologist. I'm just finishing up graduating from Northwestern, and I'm about soon to be an assistant professor in sociology at Emory University. In terms of my professional identity, I think that for me, the real shift came before I pursued my PhD. And so I first had a master's in education at Stanford in learning design and technology. And it was a step into, is this kind of my identity? And I think, and then I stepped out of academia. I worked for a research and evaluation company. Then I went back into academia when I felt like my skill set needed to be broadened. And also there were practical considerations in that. I think it's okay for your professional identity to be determined by, for example, what kinds of things you want to do, including how much you want to earn. And so that was the practical consideration in going back to the academy. But really, I took a long time to come to sociology. Sociology isn't known for being cutting edge, that's for sure, at least as far as like technology and learning is concerned. So I definitely, it's a weird place for me, but it makes a lot of sense because I'm interested in social environments, how they influence how we approach our sort of everyday encounters with technological change. And so I think that questioning and that shifting really happened prior to pursuing my PhD in sociology. And then I also had a compelling reason. I worked as a teacher in technology classes after school at a middle school in Oakland. And the thing that compelled me to go back and do my PhD was this kind of pet project about my students and what influenced their technology learning. And that is the thread that sort of pushed me through my entire career, was thinking back to that, you know, right out of college, starting to do some teaching at this middle school. And it's actually the story that I told on the job market in my job talk. And it gives people something to focus their thinking about you around that story. And so that would be my piece of advice is, what do you care about the most? And just let it really push you.
Yes, you have this very beautiful story in terms of something that kind of a nugget of an idea that you had early on, and then it kind of was there while you were pursuing your PhD. And for me, it was a little bit like, now I'm trying to look back at what I have done, which looks very disparate, but trying to find that through line because it is there. So it's similar to what you're saying, but maybe not as obvious. Okay, so thank you. And next, Gabriella.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabriella Richard, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. I'll be starting as an assistant professor of learning sciences at Penn State, so very Pennsylvania-focused these days. And just like Cassidy, I think my story oh, I'm glad that I sound clear. That is why I'm not on video, by the way. So just like Cassidy, I also had a lot of evolution in my professional identity that started prior to my doctoral studies. So at first, I was an instructional designer for quite a while. I originally wanted to be a graphic designer, and I found my way into a research and development lab. And I realized that we were designing a lot of interactive media, but we didn't really have a good concept of learning. I think we were still designing what we thought worked best for us. And then I happened upon an opportunity to teach tangible design to students and teachers in a project that I started where we taught physical computing to students and teachers in public schools. And then the learning question arose again. And I decided at that point that I wanted to pursue my PhD in educational technology and the learning sciences to understand more about what it is, what is the connection between learning with emerging media and whether it's hands-on, whether it's an instructionist or constructionist, how can we best facilitate learning? And then along that journey, I ended up going back to some of my early roots in media, culture, and communication, because I have my undergraduate degree there. And I started to realize that there was more to learning. There are a lot of these sociocultural issues involved in learning, what we've come to see as non-cognitive factors, so looking at identity and perceived ability and all of these issues that are intertwined that have a lot to do with issues around gender and race and socioeconomic status. So how can we effectively design environments that respond to those needs? And so that's kind of where my research is now, and I realize that throughout, many times I kind of feel like I have this thread where I'm working with kids and teaching them how to work with emerging technologies. And then I'm also out there studying game culture and these inequities in game culture and how do these things all combine? Well, they really do, because they're all around learning and how people develop identities. And so I've kind of come to this point where I see the threads, but it took me a while because I am a little bit interdisciplinary, coming from HCI and then moving more into research that can be seen as crossing several disciplinary boundaries. And so sometimes talking to those different fields can be difficult. So that's part of the next phase of my professional journey.
Difficult but rewarding at the end of the day, I
Yeah,
would say.
very rewarding.
Yeah.
I love being involved in so many fields, but sometimes, you have to learn the language again. So now that a lot of my work tends to respond to work in sociology, anthropology, gender studies, and all of these different areas, sometimes it's difficult to bring it all together, especially when there's different disciplinary perspectives around different terms and different ways of studying, bringing everything together.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. And then finally, last but not least at all, we have Benjamin.
Hello. Yeah, well, this is a fun conversation, partly because I think it's great hearing how other people have talked about identity, and I think that for me, it's because identity is very much a relational concept. All of my identity work has been in relation to a group or a trajectory, a group of people that I want to position myself within, or somewhere I want to go. And I spent probably almost 10 years before I went into Disney graduate school. And I found that that was very much true in the professional world in general. I worked at educational.com that was bought up by ProQuest, and I was doing a lot of like coding things, and it was really interesting to see how as soon as you were considered a technology person, you were no longer asked any content questions. And I was really interested in some of the content and strategy questions. And so it was a really, I got the job because I had technical skills, but I really wanted to be having conversations about like these virtual field trips we were building. So for me, identity was first something I engaged with as kind of a tool to make a transition. And I feel like I mostly come back to reframing my professional identity at those moments of pivoting, pivoting between jobs, pivoting between sectors, pivoting between one professional conference and a different professional conference. And I have a Word doc that's like bio blurbs, and it's almost like a blog. I don't share it with anyone else but myself, but I have like every time I'm going to go to this conference and I rewrite something and it's at the top, and those things shift and swing depending on where I'm going. So I felt like there was for me part of that professional identity shift was definitely around trying to balance technology with what I might call program. And it's so interesting because this is before I got into academia. Those were like the categories, and now in academia it's all about disciplines, and it's all about I'm this professional background or that professional background. I come from this long tradition or that long tradition. But I think that a lot of us are also working in technology and how that interfaces with learning and strategy, how power comes into that. And so I think that it's as we try to have our work be picked up in other places or make things, those kind of challenges come in as well. So those are just a couple of quick reflections, but I'm looking forward to the conversation with you all on some of these pieces.
Thank you so much, and I love that you mentioned these bios that you have in a Word doc. I have those too in a Google Doc, and it is really interesting how important it is to actually reframe and to also know that that's a good strategic move, depending on who your audience is, what the purpose of putting the bio in, whatever a proposal or a website or whatever, what that purpose is. So thank you. Okay, so that was really wonderful how you guys managed to be concise, but also very informative and inspirational. I think now we're going to move on to the Q&A session, and Adam will be leading that portion, so take it away, Adam.
All right, so it looks like one question has risen to the top, and I will read it and then just turn it over to whoever wants to answer first. The question with 4 votes is, have you encountered any challenges specific to pursuing a non-traditional path that utilizes your academic training? And so that question was originally framed for people who do self-identify as pursuing a non-traditional path, but I think in a lot of your stories you may have challenges or examples that you'd like to talk about.
I can speak to that because I have left academia, started my own company, and hired a bunch of PhDs out of academia. So the process of sort of justifying your existence as a PhD in a non-academic setting is one that my team and I wrestle with. People outside of academia think about PhDs as a special and different breed of nerds, and they on the one hand they give us way too much credit for the thing in which we have a PhD, and on the other hand they sort of assume that we're pretty useless outside of that. Like I specifically have I've had investors and advisors express strong concerns when I began building my learning team. They're like, you've got 2 PhDs on the team already. Why do you need any more? And it's clear that there are a lot of businesses in the learning space that operate on the assumption that like 1 or 2 people who kind of know what they're doing and they got that PhD will be sufficient, and then everybody else should be people who have real skills. We have succeeded at Kidaptive in carving out an identity that is especially academic. So we now have 6 PhDs going on 7. We got our 7th. She's going to be defending her dissertation in 2 days. But I think what's been most surprising to people who interact with us is that the people on my team who have PhDs are also good at other things. Like they can understand some concepts in business, and they can do some interesting things with technology, and they have nice design sensibilities even. It's a challenge to run up against the perception in the outside world that if you're a PhD, you're a grand wizard of that thing, and you don't have anything else to offer. But it's been fun to break through that and to help people understand that to have a PhD is not to be a PhD.
Great answer. Anybody else have any challenges that they've run up against?
Well, I'll just add one thing on what Dylan was saying, which is I totally agree, and I think that one reason why I think that some of those perceptions are there is I've encountered so many people coming out of PhD programs who feel like, well, I don't really have anything besides my academic, my topic that I'm now an expert in. And I actually feel like they're almost always wrong. So there's an incredible lack of self-awareness among people coming out of PhD programs. I think there's a narrowing that blinds people not just to other fields, but blinds them to themselves. And people really feel stuck. Oh, this is the only thing I could do. It's all I'm trained for. Even the things that they're trained for, they don't realize how those same skills could be used in other places. I think our programs in some ways do us a disservice in that they're so focused on the reflection and self-reflection. Am I making progress towards something like an academic job? That we don't even realize that we're making progress towards a whole bunch of things. So I think the identity frame is a good one because it would really help, I would think, almost everyone to develop a few non-academic identities with your existing skills, just to be able to practice. It takes practice. It feels awkward at first to say, oh, I'm this also, or I do these other things. I think that it's something that is incredibly useful, and it's also something that a lot of people really struggle with. They don't feel comfortable doing that kind of reflection. I think some of the best reflection for that comes not from academia, predictably, but just from thinking about like standard tools that are out there in the field, in industry. I think of things like are people familiar with like Jim Collins' hedgehog concept? I think there are some really great notions of like what are you good at, what can you kind of offer the world that are done not in academia.
Can you give us a little summary of what that concept is?
Well, there are some great online things people can,
and like going deep in like a hedgehog versus fox, that thing, or
it's kind of like the intersection of like what are you deeply passionate about, what can you be best in the world at, and what drives your kind of contribution, like what kind of economic value can you contribute. You picture the Venn overlap of those things. If you kind of make lists in each of those areas, the middle of that overlap is kind of like, oh, that's probably a core that you could go somewhere with. It's a very simple exercise. It's like Venn diagram level of analysis, but it's something that I feel like people have never gone through that practice. People's PhD programs didn't have them do this, and I'm just like, what kind of program? I've seen so many useless trainings for like non-traditional career paths where people just blabber on but don't actually give people tools. So I think that there are some pretty straightforward tools that aren't specific to academics for just like reflecting on this stuff.
That's great. We'll add it to the Etherpad, and maybe folks can do that exercise, and maybe you can share that exercise with your students at AU.
Does anybody else want to talk about challenges that they've experienced, or carving out space in your institution to do your particular type of work?
I'd like to add something. So I think becoming a postdoc is, in a way, kind of conventional, traditional trajectory for somebody who has PhD. And I think kind of echoing what Ben just said about keeping your options open. And just because it's the reason why I chose postdoc was because I was just kind of scanning the landscape of the field, and I was looking for a specific place where I can expand my skill sets related to what kind of identity I want to develop, and that's the reason why I chose postdoc, not because that was the conventional trajectory to become a professor. And I think it's very important that even if you're in a traditional trajectory, you have to be open-minded about what are other things that I can do or I can explore outside of what I'm doing every day. And just try to push that directions and think about what I can, how I can breathe different spaces, not just staying in academia and things like that. And I think it requires active thinking and effort.
So I think I'm going to add a little bit too, because I think I had a kind of non-traditional path in the sense that I was in academia for my master's, was outside of academia for teaching and doing research with the educational research company Rockman et al. And I went back into academia not with the idea that I was going to stay in academia. So I'm kind of like, I find it very ironic that I am now going into academia, but I'm not doing it with this has to be my everything. I can only be an academic. I think that what is driving me, and again, it's like the practical stuff. I think being conscientious about your income is fine. So there's the practical side of things, and then also the what is driving you. And I think it's okay to assess and reassess and think about your identity, not just your professional identity, but your entire identity. When you're talking about academia, you're talking about a really long process, and it doesn't necessarily end at the academic job. There's still tenure, and there's still and so letting think about your personal life and what you want there, and if what's driving you professionally is okay for that part of your life. So there's a wide range of things to consider, and all of those things are very valuable. And I think that I agree with Ben. I think that academia does a disservice to its students by really pushing, because it's really hard, quite frankly, to develop an academic identity and have that be solidified in the process. And you go through years and years and years of questioning that in grad school, and so there has to be a lot of effort to push you to continue to pursue it. So that's what it takes. And but if you can do whatever you can to keep that Venn diagram in the forefront, and remember that although that apparatus is there to really push you in these programs, if you're a PhD student, you don't have to go there, number one, and you have to be happy and well paid, and all of these things that have varying levels of importance to you, making a contribution in particular ways. And I think that there are new programs out there, especially considering the job market in academia is not a great one, that there's things like Versatile PhD, which now certain universities are paying that organization to come and do workshops and to provide resources for students. Take advantage of those things, follow them on Twitter, look at their online websites and blogs. So Versatile PhD has various local groups through, I think, Meetup. They have some local groups, but so you can actually meet face-to-face with people who are considering, what different career trajectories could look like. And then also, I think the Professor is In also has some information on her blog about pursuing, multiple pathways and sort of keeping your options open, but always coming back to what is really important to you, and asking that question over and over again, because you might go into a job and not like it and wonder why, and have to go back to, what's at my core, what's important to me, how do I make a contribution. Sorry for being long-winded.
Thanks for those resources. That's great. I'd never heard of this Versatile PhD. This could change everything.
We're getting kind of close on time. We did have one more question that got some upvotes, and that was, did anybody invent a job? And that could have been for a current role or past roles. Does anybody have experience inventing a position for themselves?
Yes, I invented my job. I invented the company and then the job in the company.
So you could always go that route.
Yeah, which comes first?
Well, I didn't necessarily invent a job, but I did invent a position, and that was prior to starting my academic career, but that was what took me onto the path that later became my academic career. So when I started the Physical Computing for Students and Teachers project, that was while I was an instructional designer, and I felt like it would be really instrumental for kids to learn about coding, but also working with new tangible tools. I thought they would have some really good ideas. So in that way, it ended up becoming this hybrid position where I was a designer, but I was also this outreach person that had some strange role and taught kids and teachers sometimes. So there's all kinds of creative things to do there, and that was one reason why I went down this path, because I felt like in academia you could continue to explore those kinds of horizons in ways that you can't necessarily in other jobs. So,
I can say, even though I'm on the facilitator side, maybe it's useful to share. Dixie and I, the stuff that we're doing right now at Hive Research Lab, to characterize it as inventing our jobs, in certain respects, yes, but actually, the research on innovation shows that nothing is invented out of thin air, and actually our kind of our project and our positions that we engage in right now within this network of out-of-school organizations, it came from staying. I think the lesson here for this conversation is that it came from staying very connected to a lot of different and broad social networks within that spanned research and practice and design and various kinds of sectors that were connected to the digital media and learning community, and that we were able to kind of bring particular expertise across, from the academic context into the, in this case, the informal learning world in a way that was valuable, and that's sort of what allows invention to occur. It's all about ideas coming from one particular sector and getting reapplied in useful ways to others, and that it also sounds like that's what Dylan had done with really building a shop that is focused on leveraging PhDs in the context of a game design startup, and I think that that's a good lesson for any kind of alternative or kind of professional pathways, that these sort of what we call in the social networks literature, like these structural holes between fields, often provide really rich opportunities for innovation and innovation that might lead to just a whole new position for you to occupy for yourself.
Great. Are we gonna keep with the original closing time, assuming people have to boogie?
I've got a 2 p.m. commitment that I might be a couple of minutes late to, but shouldn't be more than that.
Maybe let's say just go 5 minutes past the hour.
Let's go ahead and close with a preview of next week. So in the Etherpad, I'm posting in the agenda for next week's talk, and at the very bottom we have a resource list that we're hoping to crowdsource throughout that hangout, and actually even in the week in between, if people can get into the Etherpad and go ahead and add resources that you have found particularly helpful. So the professor is in the Versatile PhD, great examples of some of those resources. So as we're wrapping up here, does anybody have any additional resources that they'd like to talk about right now for just a minute and add to that list before we wrap up? Things that have helped you find a job or find ideas of jobs?
Well, one quick thing is just that I think that there isn't one way to do it. There is kind of an entrepreneurial mode, and some people are drawn towards that. They like putting ideas out there, like constantly throwing things at the wall. Other people would much rather have stability and have a model and say, I'm going to do that too. And I think there are lots of knowing a little bit about which of those kinds of things you like to do. I think there are forms of identity expression which are trying to say, hey, I'm different, and there are forms of identity expression that say, hey, I can be part of your team. And both of those, everyone has to do a little bit of both of those, but I think that that's one thing to kind of think about is what kind of a person are you trying to be when you do that kind of identity work. I think those are somewhat separate things and both useful.
Excellent. That's a great perspective. Anyone else? Any sort of closing thoughts, I guess?
The ecosystem is becoming much more flexible. Even over the past 10 years, there's been a huge shift in the willingness of people to negotiate with you about your professional identity and to embrace more interdisciplinary identities. So it's a good time to be idiosyncratic with your passions and pursuits.
Yeah, go ahead, Cassidy.
I'm going to make a practical sort of shout out, which I always tell my friends. When you're looking for a job, don't go to the places necessarily that are hiring. Go and do an informational interview. This is something that I had no idea even existed in the world. But especially if you have no idea, kind of what's out there, ask around, look for organizations, and just ask them for an informational interview. They might not be hiring. You get to know that organization or types of organizations like them. It's a no-risk kind of thing, and that's actually what got me my job after I finished my master's in education. So it was just an informational interview, and maybe halfway through they were like, "Yeah, this is a real interview," and so things like that can lead to things. Absolutely, I know it's happened to several people, but it's also just a good way to get information. If you feel like online resources are not really helping, but you might be collecting a list of organizations, go ahead and ask somebody to give you 15 minutes of their time to talk about their organization. They will love it. How often do they get asked to talk about what they do? So that's the big thing that I encourage people when you're considering where you want to go in your career and how to widen your ideas about what's possible, just ask for an informational interview.
Great.
Anything else that folks might want to add to this? This is all great, and I also love that you guys all gave such great advice, and and many of you, and I think all of us, will be going into positions where we can share this with other people who are either, PhD students or undergrads or thinking about these issues. So this is all really great stuff.
Oh, one other thing, sorry. One other thing is, you never know. So a lot of people think that people are only hiring for quantitative skills. And what's funny is that I went back with the idea that I was going to gather a lot of quantitative skills, and I did. But then the first thing that I was asked to teach at a graduate level, qualitative methods. So you just never know what's gonna sort of, so go ahead and gather those skills, but I think the assumption that all people want is quantitative methods is not necessarily true, and that there are a lot of places out there that actually do want people who have really solid qualitative methods as well. So
that's great. And also this idea of following your passion and wanting to make differences in your community or help improve the world. Hopefully there are new venues for sort of exploring that in an academic. Well, they do exist, but hopefully there's more of an opening up so that becomes even more pervasive and available. Okay, I think maybe we can close this webinar. Is that sort of the plan? Sorry, it's a little unclear when the end time is, but
maybe just a final plug for what time next week's webinar is and what we'll be doing. I know that we're gathering next week. I'm going to be talking more explicitly about these resources for navigating career opportunities in various pathways, and it's going to be on Wednesday, May 27th, at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Central time, wait a minute, 10 a.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern does not make sense. We're going to confirm that final time. I believe is it 1 p.m. Eastern? Is that what's happening?
Probably.
But we hope that you can join us next week for that more explicitly resource focused. But we'll also have a great panel lined up with folks from the museum world, folks from the academic world. One of Dylan's colleagues over at Kidaptive is also going to be joining again, David Hatfield. So looking forward to continuing the conversation there. And thanks everyone for your patience as we slog through our technical difficulties this week.
And thank you to all our wonderful guests. This was really helpful. And I hope everybody else enjoyed this webinar. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Good to see you all.
Bye.
Thanks so much.